The night was colder than usual, with an unsettling stillness hanging in the air. I had been pacing in the kitchen for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of everything, but no matter how many times I went over it in my mind, the situation still seemed impossible. I couldn't stop thinking about that final argument with Grace and the way things had spiraled so quickly. It was supposed to be a simple evening, but here I was, at a crossroads, feeling like I was drowning in a sea of lies, broken promises, and regret. I had always believed that family meant everything, that blood ran deeper than any other bond. But now, staring out the window at the dark street, I was questioning everything I'd been taught. The images of my parents, especially my dad, flooded my mind. There had been good times, I guess. But then there was Grace, and how she twisted every moment, manipulating everything for her own benefit. She had been a part of the family for as long as I could remember, but I was beginning to wonder if she ever really was. I had hoped that maybe I was overreacting. After all, she was my sister, my flesh and blood. But even as I tried to talk myself into it, I knew deep down that I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. There had been too many lies, too many little things she had done that gnawed away at my sense of self. The way she took advantage of my vulnerability. The way she always twisted things to make me feel like I was the problem. It was like walking through a fog where nothing was clear, but you still knew something was off. The phone on the counter buzzed, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a message from my mom. I hadn't talked to her in a few days, and seeing her name made me pause. I hesitated before opening it, already dreading whatever words I was about to read. Just wanted to check in. How are you holding up? Your dad's been worried. Worried? After everything? The frustration bubbled up in my chest. It wasn't worry I saw when I looked at my father. It was control. It was suffocating. I could feel the tension in my jaw as I typed a quick reply. I'm fine, Mom. Everything's fine. I hit send before I could even think about it. I hated the lies I told them, but they were the only way to keep the peace, to avoid the endless questions, the judgment, the disappointment. But no matter how many times I lied, the truth was still there, lurking in the back of my mind, waiting to be confronted. I leaned against the counter, rubbing my temples. This had gone on long enough. The feeling of being trapped, stuck in a cycle of appeasing everyone else, was wearing me down. And then there was Grace. Her smile, her manipulations, her ability to make everything feel like it was my fault. I had been her protector for so long, but I was starting to realize that my role in her life wasn't to be her crutch. I wasn't supposed to carry her weight, especially when she kept throwing me under the bus. I needed a break. I needed some space to breathe, to figure out who I was without all the expectations. But the question was, could I do it? Could I walk away from everything I had known, from the family that had always been there, albeit in its own toxic way? The sound of footsteps echoed through the house, and I quickly wiped away the tears that had been quietly gathering. It was my dad, stepping into the kitchen. He wasn't exactly the most emotionally available person, but somehow, tonight, it felt like he was here for a reason. He had been distant for a while, especially since Grace had moved in. She had this way of keeping him occupied, of making him feel needed, even though it was just a manipulation, a way to keep him on her side. I looked up as he leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. His eyes were tired, but there was a sharpness to them, a familiarity that sent a shiver down my spine. It was like he could sense the shift in the air, the tension I'd been holding inside. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice low. I forced a smile, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, just thinking. You know how it is." He didn't buy it. Not for a second. Thinking about what? I hesitated. For a moment, I considered telling him everything. The way Grace had been playing us both, how she twisted everything to her advantage, how I felt like I was losing myself in this toxic dynamic. But I knew better. If I opened up to him, it wouldn't end well. He was too loyal to Grace, too blind to the game she played. All he would do was make me feel worse, make me doubt myself even more. I shook my head. "It's nothing, Dad. I'm fine." He didn't seem convinced, but he let it go. "All right. Just remember, you've got us. We're a family, you know?" The words hung in the air like a weight, suffocating me. I stared at him, his tired eyes filled with a kind of sorrow that only came from years of unresolved tension. He wasn't a bad person, I knew that, but he was complicit. He allowed Grace's manipulations to continue, allowed me to carry the burden while pretending everything was fine. And I was tired of pretending. Yeah, I know, I muttered, not even sure if I meant it. He gave me a nod before turning and leaving the kitchen, leaving me alone with my thoughts again. My hands trembled slightly as I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The weight of it all, my family, the lies, the guilt, was almost too much to bear. But as I stood there in the empty kitchen, I knew I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change, and I was the only one who could make it happen. But I didn't know if I was ready for the consequences of that choice. Could I really walk away? Could I let go of my family, the only thing I had ever known, to find a sense of peace? The thought terrified me. But the alternative, living in this endless cycle of manipulation and false love, was far worse. I needed to break free. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I was bombarded with thoughts, flashbacks of Grace's latest manipulations, the way she'd twist everything to fit her narrative, the way my family blindly followed her lead. I tossed and turned in bed, the weight of it all pressing down on me, suffocating. I was torn between wanting to confront her, call her out for everything she had done, and the fear of what would happen if I did. What if I was wrong? What if it was just my imagination running wild, and everything was fine? But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was trapped, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't seem to escape the web Grace had woven around me. The sun was barely up when I finally dragged myself out of bed. I took a quick shower, hoping it would clear my mind, but all it did was leave me feeling numb. The usual routine didn't help. I got dressed, made myself some coffee, and sat down at the kitchen table. The same table where I had shared countless meals with my family, where we had laughed, fought, and pretended everything was normal. But now, every time I sat here, I felt like I was playing a role in some twisted performance, trying to keep up appearances for the sake of everyone around me. I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep up the act. I heard footsteps behind me, and before I could react, Grace entered the kitchen. She had that smile. One of those smiles that made everything seem like it was okay, even when it clearly wasn't. She looked so innocent, so sweet, like she hadn't just manipulated me into doing her bidding for years. She didn't notice the way I tensed up, the way my hands clenched around my coffee mug, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Good morning," she said cheerfully, her voice too bright, too fake. She walked over to the counter and began fixing herself breakfast without waiting for a response. I didn't answer immediately. I wasn't sure if I could trust myself to speak without it all spilling out, without telling her exactly what I thought of her and everything she'd done. Instead, I just stared at my coffee, trying to push down the anger bubbling up inside me. The nerve of her. How could she just waltz in here like nothing was wrong? Like I wasn't on the edge of a breakdown, suffocated by the lies and manipulation she had been feeding me for so long? She finally turned around, her eyes catching mine. "You're awfully quiet today. Everything okay?" It was almost laughable. "Yeah, everything's fine," I said, my voice a little too sharp, a little too defensive. "Just tired, that's all." Grace studied me for a moment, her expression shifting. She could always sense when something was off. It was one of the many things I hated about her. She was like a spider, able to read every little movement, every slight change in tone, and use it to her advantage. But I wasn't going to let her have the upper hand this time. I set my mug down with more force than necessary. "Do you ever wonder what you're doing to people?" Her smile faltered for a brief moment, but she recovered quickly. "What do you mean?" I wasn't sure if I wanted to say more, but the words were spilling out before I could stop them. "I mean, how you twist everything to fit your story. How you make everyone around you feel like they're the problem, like they're the ones causing the chaos, when you're the one pulling all the strings." She blinked, taken aback by my sudden outburst, but I could see that familiar glint in her eyes, the one that told me she was already thinking ahead, calculating her response. "That's a pretty harsh thing to say," she said, her voice low but calm. "I don't know what's gotten into you, but if you're upset, you should talk about it. We're family, remember?" That last part hit me like a slap in the face. Family? I scoffed. That's what you keep saying, but it's not about family, is it? It's about control. It's about you getting what you want, no matter who you have to step on to get there. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. Grace's eyes flicked to the movement, her posture tense, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she just watched me, her expression unreadable. It was like she was waiting for me to back down, like she always did. But I couldn't. Not this time. I'm done, Grace, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm done pretending that everything is fine, that you're this sweet, innocent person who's just misunderstood. I see you now for what you really are. And I'm not going to let you do this to me anymore. There was a long pause, where nothing but the sound of my own breathing filled the room. Then Grace's face twisted in something between anger and disbelief. You're being ridiculous, she snapped, her voice sharp. You don't know what you're talking about. You never do. Everything I've done is for this family. For you. I shook my head. No. You've been using this family to get what you want, Grace. And I'm not going to keep enabling it. For a moment, it looked like she was going to say something else. But instead, she turned away, her back to me, her shoulders tense. Fine, she muttered under her breath. If you're going to be like this, then maybe you should leave. I don't need this kind of negativity in my life. I was stunned by the venom in her words. I had expected her to fight back, but this was different. It was like a switch had flipped, and now she was turning the tables, trying to make me feel like I was the one in the wrong. It was the same tactic she had always used. Make me feel guilty for standing up for myself. Make me question my own worth. But I wasn't going to let her anymore. I grabbed my keys from the counter, my hands shaking slightly. Maybe I will leave, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Maybe I need some space to figure out what's best for me. For once, I'm going to do what's right for me. Grace didn't respond, but I could feel her eyes boring into my back as I walked out the door. As I stepped into the cold air, I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally starting to take control of my life again. And I wasn't going to let Grace, or anyone else, take that away from me. The next few days were a blur of emotions. I didn't have the courage to go back to the house. I stayed at a friend's place, just trying to clear my head, but Grace's words kept echoing in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was making a huge mistake, that maybe I had overreacted, that maybe I had misunderstood her. My thoughts were tangled, conflicting. The guilt crept in, gnawing at me. Was I being too harsh? Had I misjudged her intentions? But then I remembered all the times she had gaslit me, manipulated the people around us, made me feel small and insignificant. That's when the anger would come rushing back, sharp and cold. No, I wasn't being unreasonable. I had been the one to put up with her behavior for too long, and I couldn't keep sacrificing my happiness just to keep the peace. Still, the silence between us was suffocating. I couldn't keep hiding forever. I needed to confront her, to put everything out in the open once and for all. But I wasn't sure if I was ready. What if things got worse? What if she turned everyone against me, the way she always did? Every time I tried to think of what to say, I froze, paralyzed by the fear of losing everything I had left. It was around noon on the third day when I finally caved and texted her. I wasn't sure what I wanted, but I couldn't keep running away. The message was short and to the point. Can we talk? Almost instantly, I saw the 3 dots appear, and then she replied, sure. I'll be home in 30. I don't know what I expected. Maybe her to apologize, maybe her to act like nothing had happened. But as soon as I walked through the door, I felt the tension in the air. It was thick, almost suffocating. Grace was sitting at the kitchen table, her arms crossed, her expression hard to read. Her posture was stiff, defensive. You're here, she said, her voice flat. What do you want to talk about? I stood there for a second, trying to gather my thoughts. The place hadn't changed. Everything was still the same, and yet everything felt different. I felt like an intruder in my own home, but I had to do this. For my own sanity. I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending like everything's okay, Grace, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We both know it's not. The way you've been treating me, manipulating the people around us, it's not okay. I can't live like this anymore." She rolled her eyes, the familiar defensive smirk creeping onto her face. "Oh, please. Here we go again with this nonsense. You act like I'm the one with the problem. Maybe if you weren't so paranoid all the time, we wouldn't be in this situation." I felt my heart race. The words she was saying were all too familiar. She was deflecting, turning it all around on me. It was like she had a script, and she was sticking to it. Every time I called her out on something, she would twist it, make me question myself. I couldn't let her do it again. "No," I said, my voice louder than I intended. "I'm not the problem here. I'm trying to be honest with you, and all you do is gaslight me. You make me feel like I'm crazy for noticing the way you manipulate everyone, how you use people to get what you want. But I'm done letting you control this." Her eyes flashed with anger, but I could see something else there too, a flicker of fear, maybe. The vulnerability that she usually hid behind her calm exterior was slipping through, just for a moment. But it was enough to make me stand firm. "I don't know why you think you can talk to me like that," she said, her voice low and venomous now. "You don't know what it's like to be in my position, dealing with everything I do. You've never understood." "Understood what?" I snapped, finally letting the frustration spill out. "How to manipulate people. How to control everyone around you to make yourself feel better. How to break me down until I feel like I'm the one with the problem. Because I don't understand that. And I don't want to." There was a long, heavy silence between us. I could feel the tension in the room, the years of resentment bubbling to the surface. Grace didn't speak right away, her gaze fixed on the table, her lips pressed tightly together. For a moment, I wondered if she was finally going to admit what she had done, if maybe this would be the breakthrough I was hoping for. But when she finally looked up, her eyes were cold, calculating. "You don't get it, do you?" she said, her voice steady but tinged with something darker. "You think I'm the bad guy, that I'm the one who's been manipulating everyone. But you're wrong. Everything I've done for us, for this family, for you. And you think you're the only one who's been hurt in this? You have no idea what it's been like for me." I shook my head, feeling the anger surge again. "Stop with the victim act, Grace. I've had enough. I see what you're doing, and I'm not going to let you use me anymore. I'm not your pawn." Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of real emotion, resentment, frustration, maybe even fear. She didn't like being confronted. She didn't like not being in control, but she had lost control of me, and that terrified her. "You're making a huge mistake," she said, her voice quieter now, almost pleading. "You think you're better off without me, but you're wrong. You'll see. You'll regret this." But I couldn't back down. I had to keep going. For myself, for my future. "No, Grace," I said, my voice firm. "I won't regret it. I can't keep living in this toxic environment. I'm done." She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. For a moment, I thought she was going to say something else, maybe lash out in anger, but she didn't. Instead, she just stared at me with that cold, emotionless gaze. "Fine," she said flatly, her voice devoid of the warmth it had once had. "Do whatever you want. But don't come crawling back when it all falls apart." I didn't respond. I just turned and walked out, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what was coming next. The fear of the unknown, of what Grace might do now that she felt cornered, was still there. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was making the right choice. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was finally taking control of my life again. I thought that leaving would give me a sense of clarity, a clean break. But instead, the days that followed only felt heavier. The house was silent without her presence, and the weight of the silence was almost suffocating. I tried to keep busy, focused on work, hanging out with friends, even trying to figure out if there was a way forward that didn't involve the mess Grace had left behind. But it wasn't enough. Every time I picked up my phone, I couldn't help but think of her. The texts, the calls, the little moments that kept pulling me back to her. I tried ignoring them, telling myself it was for the best, but a part of me still missed the way she could make me feel like I was the most important person in the world one moment, and the next, like I didn't matter at all. It was exhausting, trying to figure out what was real and what was just another manipulation. I knew I couldn't go back to her. I wouldn't. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't gotten closure, that we had left things unfinished. A week passed before she showed up at my apartment. I didn't see it coming. I was home alone, reading on the couch, trying to unwind from the workday when there was a knock at the door. It wasn't until I opened it that I saw her standing there, looking almost small, in the way she stood with her arms folded and her gaze downcast. I hadn't expected her to come to me. If anything, I thought she'd just keep playing her games, like she always had. But there she was, looking vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen before. "You're not answering my calls," she said, her voice quieter than usual. The edge of her usual sharpness was gone, replaced by something else, something softer. It caught me off guard. "I've been busy," I replied, though the words felt hollow. The truth was, I didn't want to talk to her. Not right now, not like this. She had taken too much from me, and I wasn't ready to go back to that place of uncertainty. Grace looked at me for a moment, then sighed, rubbing her forehead as if the weight of everything had finally hit her. "I messed up, okay? I didn't mean for things to go this far. I didn't realize how badly I hurt you until now." My stomach churned at her words. I had heard versions of this before. She would apologize, promise to change, and I'd be foolish enough to believe it. Then the cycle would start again. She was good at this. Really good. But I wasn't that person anymore. "You've hurt me, Grace," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You've hurt me more times than I can count, and I can't keep living like this. You don't get to manipulate me, to control me, and then think you can come back with a sorry and make it all okay. It doesn't work like that." I saw her eyes flash, but she didn't interrupt me. For a moment, we just stood there in silence. There was no yelling, no fighting. It was just the two of us, the tension hanging in the air between us, thick and uncomfortable. "I know you're angry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I deserve it. I just don't know what I'd do without you." Her words were heavy with emotion, but they didn't move me. Not anymore. I had heard the same line too many times. I had been her emotional crutch, her anchor, while she tore me down piece by piece. And I couldn't keep being that for her. "I don't know what to say, Grace," I replied honestly. "I just can't do this anymore. I can't be a part of your games. I need to focus on myself. I need to find out who I am without you in my life." She looked at me like she wanted to say something else, but then her gaze softened. "I get it. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted to say it. I'm sorry for everything. For the lies, the manipulation, the way I treated you. I don't know how to fix it, but I'm sorry." Her apology felt like a hollow echo of everything that had gone wrong. It wasn't the kind of apology I needed. It wasn't enough. Not for everything she'd done, but it was something. And that something was the last string I was willing to hold on to. She had apologized, but I knew that wasn't going to change who she was or the damage that had been done. "You can't fix this, Grace," I said, my voice softer now, less harsh. "You've had your chances, and I've given you everything I could. But I'm done. I have to move on. For my own sake." I watched her face fall as the reality of what I was saying finally set in. There was no bargaining now, no twisting my words. I had made up my mind. She stood there for a long moment, just staring at me, her face unreadable, before she finally nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "I get it. I hope one day you can understand why I did the things I did. But for now, I guess this is goodbye." I didn't know what to say to that. I just nodded, stepping back and closing the door gently behind me. I didn't want to slam it in her face, but I needed the distance. I needed to breathe, to get away from the person who had torn me apart, and somehow still managed to make me feel guilty for walking away. I stood there for a long time, the weight of it all crashing down on me. The quiet that followed her departure was deafening. It felt like I had just cut a huge part of my life out of me, like I was missing something. But deep down, I knew it was for the best. The relationship, the memories, all of it. It had been toxic. And no matter how much I missed the good moments, I couldn't afford to ignore the damage she had caused. As I sat down on the couch, I felt something strange. Relief. I had made the right choice. It wasn't easy, and it sure as hell wasn't painless, but I had to do it. I was finally free. And maybe, for the first time in a long time, I was starting to feel like myself again. The next few days were strange. The absence of Grace in my life wasn't just physical. It was emotional, too. For the first time in ages, I didn't have someone pulling me in 1,000 different directions. There were no more sudden arguments, no more manipulative conversations, no more late-night texts asking for explanations or justifications for everything that had gone wrong. I didn't realize how much her presence had occupied my thoughts until it was gone. Now, I had to figure out how to be alone with myself, and that was harder than I thought. I kept myself busy with work, picking up extra shifts, burying myself in projects that demanded all my attention. It was easier than facing the truth, but I couldn't escape my thoughts. Every now and then, when I'd find myself in the middle of a task, my mind would wander. I'd catch myself thinking about the times Grace had smiled at me, the way she'd look at me with those intense, fiery eyes when she wanted something. I couldn't deny the pull she'd had on me, the way she made me feel special when it suited her, the way she'd charm me into believing things were better than they were. But I also remembered the bad, the lies, the manipulation, the way she'd twist my love into guilt trips, making me feel like I was responsible for everything that went wrong. It was a complicated mess of feelings, and the emotional whiplash from all of it left me exhausted. I tried to keep moving forward, telling myself it was better this way. But every once in a while, the temptation to check my phone would creep in. It wasn't even about reaching out to her. It was about seeing if she was trying to contact me. Part of me wondered if she'd send a text apologizing again, or asking if we could talk. But I resisted. I deleted her number. I unfollowed her on social media. I couldn't afford to go back to that place. It had been a week since she left, and for the first time, I realized that maybe the hardest part wasn't losing her. It was learning how to stand up for myself. I had spent so long being caught in the chaos of our relationship, constantly adjusting to her moods and needs, that I had forgotten how to take care of myself, how to live for me. One evening, I was out with a couple of friends, trying to push the thoughts of Grace to the back of my mind. We were at a bar, just drinking and talking, the atmosphere light and carefree. For the first time in a long time, I felt like myself, like I could finally breathe. I was laughing at a joke my friend Alex had made when I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. I hesitated, staring at the screen. The message came from a number I didn't recognize, but something about the notification felt familiar. My heart skipped a beat as I unlocked the phone, my mind already racing. It was from Grace. "Hey, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I can't stop thinking about you. I know things are messed up between us, but I still care about you. I miss you." I stared at the message, feeling a sick feeling in my stomach. For a moment, I wanted to reply, to tell her to leave me alone, to finally end the cycle. But then I stopped. I remembered the nights I had stayed up, wondering why she couldn't just be honest with me. I remembered the way she would twist everything I said and did to make me feel like I was the one who was always at fault. I knew what she was doing. She was trying to worm her way back in. But I wasn't the same person I was when I had first met her. I was stronger now, and I wouldn't let her pull me back into her web. I put the phone down without replying. "Everything all right?" Alex asked, his voice breaking through my thoughts. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just old stuff. Nothing to worry about." It wasn't a complete lie. It wasn't that Grace didn't matter, but I was done letting her control my emotions. I was done letting her have that kind of power over me. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I tried my best to enjoy the company of my friends, but part of me felt unsettled. The message had shaken me more than I cared to admit. I thought I was past it, but there was still a part of me that longed for closure. It wasn't just about Grace anymore. It was about me, my own healing, and whether I could ever fully let go of the past. The next few days were a mix of calm and chaos. I focused on keeping my routine, staying busy, doing everything I could to avoid being alone with my thoughts for too long. But when I wasn't looking, the memories would slip in. I'd remember the good times, the moments that had made me think she was the one. I'd remember how she'd kissed me in the rain, how she'd made me feel like I was the center of her world, if only for a moment. But then I'd remember the rest, the lies, the broken promises, The times I had ignored my own feelings because I didn't want to face the truth about who she really was. I started to feel angry at myself for allowing it to go on for as long as it had. I hated how easily I had fallen for her manipulation, how I had let her make me feel guilty for things that weren't my fault. I hated that I had let my own needs and desires slip away just to cater to hers. I had lost myself in her, and I didn't know how to get that person back. But I had to. I had to find a way to heal, to rebuild the life I had almost lost in the wake of her. I didn't know what that would look like yet, or how long it would take. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't go back to her. Not now. Not ever. I deleted the message without replying. And when I went to bed that night, I promised myself that I was done. I had been through too much to let her back in. It was time to move forward, no matter how hard it seemed. The hardest part was behind me. Now, all I had to do was trust that I could build something better for myself, something that didn't involve her. And that was enough for now. A few weeks had passed since the last message from Grace. The silence between us was louder than any argument we'd ever had. It was like a weight had been lifted off my chest, but the after-effects of everything we'd been through still lingered. Every now and then, I'd catch myself thinking about what could have been, what I might have done differently. But I wasn't going to let those thoughts trap me again. Not this time. I was getting better at moving on. I was seeing my friends more, spending time doing things I enjoyed. I picked up a few new hobbies, guitar, painting, and started focusing on the things that made me feel alive, not just like a spectator in my own life. But even though the fog was starting to clear, I wasn't immune to moments of weakness. It was a Saturday evening when I first saw her again. I was at a coffee shop near the park, just unwinding after a long week of work. The place was quiet, the kind of place where you could think without the world screaming at you. I had my headphones in, but as I looked up to take a sip of my coffee, I froze. There she was, Grace, standing by the counter, flipping through her phone as if she were the same person she was before everything blew up. But there was something different this time. She wasn't looking for me. She was looking around the room, like she was waiting for someone. I wasn't sure if she saw me, but I felt it. That familiar tug at my chest, the old pull I had been fighting against for months now. I wanted to look away, to avoid eye contact, but I couldn't. For a second, it felt like time had stopped. She looked softer. Her hair was a little longer, and there was a gentleness in her face I hadn't seen in a while. The coldness that usually accompanied her presence was gone, replaced by something I couldn't quite place. But I didn't move. I didn't stand up and walk over. I stayed rooted in my seat, the weight of what we'd been through anchoring me. It wasn't the time for us to talk. It wasn't the time for me to relive the past. She must have noticed me eventually. Her gaze flickered in my direction, and for a split second, our eyes met. Her face tightened. Her lips parted like she was going to say something, but she didn't. Instead, she turned away and walked to the door, disappearing into the cold outside world without another word. The moment was over before I could process it fully, but I didn't feel the pull anymore. It was gone, as quickly as it had come. I sat there for a few moments, letting the weight of everything settle. That had been it. The final chapter, the last little test to see if I was strong enough to resist the temptation to fall back into old patterns. I was stronger. The following days passed without much more drama. I kept moving forward. There were moments when the loneliness crept in, when I questioned if I'd made the right decision. But I had to remind myself that walking away was the right thing to do for both of us. We weren't good for each other anymore. It wasn't about love or hate. It was just about truth. We couldn't keep hurting each other in the name of something that wasn't real. Then one night, as I was scrolling through social media, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Grace had posted something, a picture of herself at some bar, laughing with friends. But it wasn't the photo that caught my attention. It was the caption. Found peace. Finally. It's been a journey, but I think I'm finally free. I froze. Something about that hit me harder than anything else. I wasn't sure if it was guilt or relief or both, but I felt it, deep. It was like she was letting go too. And in a strange way, that made me feel less like a fool for trying to do the same. But I knew it wasn't my responsibility anymore. It wasn't my place to help her find her peace, just like it wasn't hers to help me find mine. The next few weeks felt like a rebirth of sorts. I spent my time focusing on myself, creating the kind of life I had been too afraid to embrace before. I went on dates, met new people, and started to enjoy my freedom. I wasn't running from my past anymore. I was running toward a future that was mine to create, one step at a time. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And as I stood in the kitchen one night, cooking dinner for myself, the sound of the phone buzzing startled me. A quick glance at the screen and my heart skipped a beat. It was Grace again. Hey, I know things ended the way they did, and I never really apologized for how much I hurt you. I'm sorry. I hope you're doing well. It was a simple message, but somehow, it meant everything. I stared at it for a moment, then I deleted it. Because this time, it wasn't about her. It was about me, and I was done looking back. I sent a quick message to a friend, letting them know I was heading out. I grabbed my coat, locked the door behind me, and stepped into the night. The past was behind me, and I was finally free. The days that followed felt like an intense tug-of-war between moving forward and looking back. I kept telling myself that I was doing the right thing, that deleting Grace from my life was the only choice. But the temptation to check my phone, to see if she had sent anything else, never really went away. It was a battle I had to fight every single day, and some days felt harder than others. Then, one evening, I was out at a cafe, catching up with a friend from college. We were talking about life, about relationships, about how everything had a way of falling into place. Or at least, that's what people like to say. As we chatted, I glanced up at the door, and that's when I saw her. Grace. She walked in like she owned the place, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. My heart hammered in my chest. I could feel the air in the room shift. The familiar tightness in my throat came back. But this time, it didn't feel the same. It didn't feel like I was still that guy who would drop everything for her. No, this time, I was aware. I was alert. I had changed. She smiled when she saw me, and it was the same smile, the one that used to melt me. I felt nothing. No warmth, no desire to rush over and make everything okay. I just felt numb. And that was a revelation in itself. I was okay with the numbness. I was finally free from her hold. She walked over, and I could see the apology written all over her face. It was like she was rehearsing it in her head, figuring out how to make me feel like I owed her a second chance. The old me might have fallen for it, but not now. Hey, she said, her voice soft, almost hesitant. Grace, I replied, keeping my tone even. My friend, sensing the shift, suddenly became interested in his drink. I've been thinking about you. About us, she continued, sitting down across from me without asking. I know things ended badly, and I hate that it happened that way. I was wrong. I made mistakes. Can we talk about it? I took a deep breath, feeling every ounce of frustration from the past months bubble up, but I kept it cool. We've talked about it, Grace, over and over, and every time, it ended with me feeling like I was the problem, like I was the one who needed to fix things. But I'm done with that. You can't keep coming back into my life whenever it's convenient for you. I'm not the guy who falls for that anymore. Her face tightened, and I saw a flicker of the old Grace, the one who could turn on the charm at a moment's notice. You're really done, huh? Just like that? I nodded. I'm done. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then, she let out a small laugh, but it didn't reach her eyes. You think you're better off without me? No, I said. I think I'm better off without the version of myself I became when I was with you. She sat there, her gaze darkening as she processed my words. But I didn't feel pity for her. I didn't feel anger or sadness. I felt nothing. And that was exactly what I needed. Grace stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You'll regret this. You'll see. You can't just erase me like this. I raised an eyebrow. Watch me. And with that, she turned and walked out. There was no dramatic exit, no tearful breakdown, just a quiet, confident walk out the door. It was almost anticlimactic, but maybe that's how it was meant to be. I sat there for a few more minutes, letting the weight of everything sink in. I felt lighter. The knot in my stomach loosened. I wasn't trapped anymore. After Grace left, I glanced at my phone. No new messages. No calls. I was relieved. It was like I had finally made it through the other side. My friend, who had been mostly quiet during the whole interaction, looked over at me. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. "I think I am." It wasn't about being angry anymore. It wasn't about trying to make sense of the past. It was about taking the lessons I had learned and applying them to my own growth. I was moving on. I had to. Later that night, I sat in bed, reflecting on how much I had changed. There was a time when I would have begged Grace to come back, when I would have twisted myself into knots to fix things. But not anymore. I had learned to stand up for myself, to recognize the toxic patterns that had held me captive for so long. I wasn't perfect, but I was stronger than I had been when she first walked into my life. And in the end, I realized that the hardest part wasn't getting rid of Grace. It was letting go of the version of myself that had let her control me. It was about rebuilding who I was, without the weight of her manipulation. I knew I still had a long way to go, but for the first time in months, I felt hopeful. I could finally see the future, a future where I was in control of my own life, my own happiness. As I turned off the light and drifted off to sleep, I promised myself that I would never let someone else dictate my worth again. And that was the first step in reclaiming my life.